There are betrayals that cut like knives, loud, sharp, unforgettable. And then there are the quiet ones. The ones that happen in a single glance, in the silence of someone you love most, when you needed their voice and they said nothing at all. For Marcus Fred, a father, a provider, a man who gave until there was nothing left, that silence was louder than any insult. It came not from strangers, not from enemies, but from his own flesh and blood, his daughter, Denise. On a snowy Christmas night, he arrived with a gift from the heart, carrying the same pie his late wife once baked to keep the family together. But instead of warmth, he was met at the door with rejection. His son-in-law's voice was cold steel, his daughter's silence colder still. He turned away humiliated, clutching the pie in his trembling hands, the snow swallowing his footsteps. They thought it would end there, that an old man's love could be dismissed, discarded, forgotten. But Marcus held the one thing they never expected, the truth. Every dollar, every sacrifice, every hidden cost of their so-called perfect life, recorded, preserved, undeniable. And when that truth rose to the surface, it did more than shake a family. It cracked open a community, exposing greed, silence, and betrayal in ways no one could look away from. This is not just the story of a father and his daughter. It is the story of dignity reclaimed, of silence breaking, of a man who chose to stand, when the world tried to push him out. Before I go further, I need you with me on this. Where are you watching from? Have you ever given everything to someone only to be humiliated in return? Share your experience in the comments. I want to know how many of you have walked through betrayal like this. The kitchen clock ticked louder than it should have. Marcus Fred sat at the small wooden table, hands folded before him, watching the second hand sweep in endless circles. Across from him, the chair where his wife once sat was empty. It had been empty for 7 Christmases now, but tonight the silence pressed harder than usual, like the air itself was punishing him for being alive without her. The box of ornaments lay open on the counter. Gold stars, chipped angels, and a crooked red sleigh his daughter Denise made in 3rd grade. He picked one up, the sleigh, its paint faded and uneven. He remembered Denise at the dining table, tongue peeking out as she brushed the red on with clumsy strokes. Her mother had laughed and said, "It's perfect, baby." Perfect. And it was. Perfect because family made it so. Now, that same sleigh trembled in Marcus's hand as he held it up to the light. The memories brought warmth and pain in equal measure. He had not decorated the house in years. What was the point? There was no Denise running around the tree, no wife humming carols while basting the ham. The house had become a hollow shell, too big for one man, too quiet for one heart. He tried to fill the silence sometimes. The radio stayed on most evenings, tuned to old gospel hymns. He cooked small meals, stews that could last 3 nights, though he ate little of them. He talked to his late wife sometimes, aloud, his voice catching in the empty rooms. "Lydia," he whispered often, "I'm doing the best I can." Tonight, with Christmas only days away, the silence felt unbearable. He thought of Denise. She was all he had left, his only daughter, his blood, his pride once upon a time. He remembered Christmas mornings when she would wake him before sunrise, tugging at his sleeve, begging to open presents. Lydia would laugh and make hot chocolate, and Marcus would sit cross-legged on the floor in his robe, watching Denise tear into wrapping paper with squeals of joy. Those memories warmed him, but they also deepened the ache. Because now, years later, the laughter was gone, replaced by polite phone calls and long silences. He could not remember the last time she had sat at his table just to share a meal. Her life had become wrapped around Jerry, her husband, and the world they built together. Marcus reached for his cup of coffee, now gone cold. He thought of the money he had poured into their lives. Mortgage payments, school tuition, even Jerry's shiny car. At the time, it hadn't felt like a sacrifice. It had felt like love, duty, what any father should do to keep his child safe and happy. But lately he wondered if it had made him invisible instead. If his generosity had bought not gratitude but distance. The phone on the counter buzzed. A text. For a moment his heart lifted, hoping it was Denise. But it wasn't. Just a notification from the bank. He set it down without opening it. The ornaments caught his eye again. He lifted another one, a glass angel Lydia had bought during their first Christmas together. Its wings were cracked but still shining. He set it in the center of the table, a silent companion. "Another Christmas, Lydia," he murmured, his voice breaking slightly. "Just me again." The house gave no answer. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the clock. Marcus sat there long after the coffee went cold, staring at the angel, surrounded by ornaments that had once been symbols of family and joy. Now they were relics of a time gone, reminders of what he had lost and what he feared might never return. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. He pulled his sweater tighter and closed his eyes. For a fleeting second, he imagined Denise as a child again, rushing into the room, arms full of excitement, shouting, "Daddy, it's Christmas!" The vision vanished as quickly as it came. The house remained empty. The shoebox in the attic had been gathering weight for nearly a decade. At first, it held only a few receipts and canceled checks, things Marcus kept out of habit. But as the years passed, it became a silent archive of his life's quiet sacrifices, each slip of paper a reminder of what he had given and what it had cost. It had started with Denise's college years. Marcus remembered sitting across from the bursar's desk, his hands trembling as he wrote the tuition check. "It's the last one, Daddy, I promise," Denise had said, her eyes wide with both hope and shame. He had smiled, brushing off her guilt. "You just finish strong, baby. Don't you worry about me." He had gone home that night, reheated last night's stew, and told Lydia he was proud their girl was almost there. Lydia had squeezed his hand, whispering, "We'll manage. We always do." After Lydia passed, the requests came more often. Denise had married Jerry by then, and though Jerry always spoke of his business as though it were a rising empire, the bills never stopped. A mortgage payment here, a car repair there. When Denise's job fell through for a year, Marcus covered not just their rent but the groceries too. He'd sit at his own kitchen table, spreading out his checkbook, counting down his dwindling retirement savings with weary eyes. Still, he told himself this was what fathers did. Fathers built bridges with their backs so their children could walk safely to the other side. Fathers worked, scraped, and bent until there was nothing left to bend, so their daughters would never feel the hunger or the fear they had once known. He could see Denise's relief whenever he stepped in. Her shoulders would sag with gratitude, though her voice often trembled when she said, "Thank you, Daddy. I'll pay you back. Jerry and I just need time." He never asked when. He never asked how. One memory cut sharper than the rest. Tasha, his granddaughter, had been 7 at the time. She needed braces, and Jerry insisted it was too expensive, that she could wait. Marcus couldn't bear the thought of his granddaughter growing up ashamed of her smile. He walked into the orthodontist's office the next morning and handed over his credit card. "She'll have the best teeth in the room," he had said, winking at Tasha, who beamed at him with the same crooked grin he was determined to straighten. But as the years dragged on, Marcus began to feel the weight. His house grew colder in the winter because he kept the thermostat low to save money. His meals became smaller, his clothes older, his outings fewer. The shoebox in the attic grew fatter, stuffed with receipts marked mortgage, tuition, braces, car repair. Each one a slip of his life, a piece of his future handed over for theirs. And still, Jerry strutted through family gatherings in tailored suits, a new watch gleaming on his wrist, Denise driving an SUV Marcus had helped finance. They spoke of vacations, business opportunities, and wine tastings as though money flowed from endless springs. Marcus nodded along quietly, never speaking of the small sacrifices that kept their world spinning. One night, when the house felt particularly lonely, Marcus climbed into the attic and pulled out the shoebox. He set it down on the floorboards, opened the lid, and began sifting through the records. He read the dates aloud: 2013, 2015, 2018. Each year seemed to echo back at him, a reminder of time and money he would never reclaim. His late wife's voice whispered in his memory, "Don't forget yourself, Marcus. Don't give so much you disappear." But Marcus had given anyway. Because what else was a father for, if not to carry his children further than he had ever gone? He closed the shoebox, slid it back into its corner, and shut the attic light. The house creaked as he descended the stairs, but the sound was no heavier than the silence in his heart. Marcus stood before the mirror, straightening the collar of his best shirt. It wasn't new, he hadn't bought new clothes in years, but he pressed it carefully that morning, smoothing the faded cotton until the lines were sharp. His gray suit hung loosely on his frame, shoulders softened with age, but it carried with it dignity. On the counter, wrapped neatly in foil, sat a pecan pie. He had baked it himself, though the recipe had been Lydia's. The foil was the same roll she once used, kept in his cupboard like a relic. Christmas had always been her favorite holiday. She would hum carols as she baked, pressing Marcus into tasting spoonfuls of pie filling, her laughter filling the kitchen. Tonight, as he smoothed the foil around the pie dish, her absence pressed against him. Still, he whispered, "You'd be proud, Lydia. I'm bringing it to our girl." The drive to Denise's house was quiet, his old Buick rattling against the wind. Suburban streets glowed with colored lights, every home alive with music and warmth. Marcus's heart beat faster as he pulled into the cul-de-sac. He imagined Denise's smile when she saw him, Tasha rushing into his arms, the family gathered around the tree. For all the distance and silence of recent years, tonight was Christmas. Tonight had to be different. He carried the pie carefully up the steps, each breath visible in the frosty air. The front windows glowed golden, laughter spilled faintly through the glass. Marcus smiled, lifted his free hand and knocked. The door opened. But it wasn't Denise. Jerry stood there, framed by the warm light of the house behind him. He wore a crisp sweater, a drink in hand, his face expressionless. The music inside grew louder for a brief moment before the door closed just enough to muffle it. "Evening," Marcus said softly, shifting the pie in his arms. "I brought dessert." Jerry didn't move aside. His eyes were flat, cold. "Not tonight." Marcus blinked. "Not tonight?" "Jerry, it's Christmas." He glanced past him, hoping to catch Denise's eye, but only shadows moved in the background. Jerry's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "You're not welcome here. Denise and I agreed, it's best you stay away." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Stay away? From my own daughter? From my granddaughter? From my family?" Jerry said, voice firm. "You make things complicated, Marcus. And we don't need complicated tonight." Marcus's grip on the pie dish trembled. "Where's Denise? Let me talk to her." Jerry tilted his head, and for the first time Denise appeared behind him. She was beautiful as always, her hair done, dress shimmering faintly in the light. For a brief second, Marcus thought she would speak, that she would run to the door, that she would tell Jerry to step aside. But she didn't. Her eyes slid away from his, fixed on the floor. She said nothing. The silence cut deeper than Jerry's words ever could. Marcus swallowed, his voice breaking. "Denise, baby girl?" But she remained still, her face frozen in shame or fear. He couldn't tell which. Jerry adjusted his grip on the door, ready to close it. "Good night, Marcus. Go home." The door shut with a final click. Marcus stood there, breath fogging in the cold air, the pie still pressed against his chest. The laughter and music resumed on the other side, muffled but cruel in their exclusion. Slowly he turned. The night sky had opened, thin snowflakes drifting down, settling on his shoulders. He walked back to the Buick, each step heavier than the last. By the time he slid behind the wheel, the pie sat untouched on the passenger seat, a symbol of love denied. He didn't start the engine right away. He sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield as snow gathered. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, an old man dressed in his best, holding on to traditions no one else seemed to remember. At last he whispered, "Merry Christmas," though there was no one left to hear it. "Before I go further, I need you with me on this. Where are you watching from? Have you ever given everything to someone only to be humiliated in return? Share your experience in the comments. I want to know how many of you have walked through betrayal like this." The drive home felt longer than it was. The Buick hummed along the dark road, the faint whistle of wind seeping through cracks in its old frame. Christmas lights blurred past his window, reds and greens shimmering in the cold night air, but Marcus barely noticed. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, the sting of humiliation burning fresh in his chest. When he pulled into his driveway, the house loomed silent, its windows black except for the faint twinkle of the Christmas tree in the living room. Marcus stepped inside, his breath meeting the stillness. The tree's soft glow spread across the floor, catching on Lydia's old ornaments, the ones Denise used to hang when she was small. Angels, bells, wooden stars. They carried years of laughter, years of warmth. Now they felt like ghosts. He set the untouched pecan pie on the counter. The foil crinkled sharply in the quiet, an echo of his rejection. He didn't even bother removing his coat. Instead, Marcus walked straight to his desk in the study, a heavy oak piece he'd kept for decades, its drawers lined with meticulous records. Receipts, mortgage statements, tuition checks, even handwritten notes of emergencies covered, it was all there. His life's savings poured into Denise's future, her comfort, her family. Marcus sat down slowly, pulling open the drawer that held his checkbook. His hands hovered over it for a moment. He thought of Denise's eyes at the door, the way she had refused to meet his gaze. Her silence. The silence hurt worse than Jerry's words. He opened the ledger, each line of neat handwriting staring back at him. Mortgage payments, $2,500 monthly. Tuition for Tasha's private school. Emergency car repairs. The credit card balances cleared, just this once. The total was staggering. More than $250,000 in the last decade. A number he never allowed himself to add before. Marcus reached for his pen. His fingers trembled, but not from age. From resolve. "No more," he whispered. He drew a heavy line across the ledger page. His pen pressed so hard it nearly tore the paper. The standing instructions to the bank would be stopped. He wrote the call notes in precise script. Effective immediately, cancel mortgage payments. His voice steadied as he read it aloud to the empty room. He leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking under his weight. For a moment the weight lifted. A father's duty had carried him for years, but tonight it ended. The betrayal at that door, Denise's silence, it had carved something permanent in him. Marcus turned and looked toward the Christmas tree glowing faintly in the living room. He could see it through the open door, soft lights twinkling against the dark. Once, that tree had been the center of his family. Once, it meant togetherness. Tonight, it bore witness to his solitude and his decision. He thought of Lydia. He imagined her voice, calm but firm, telling him he had done enough. That love was not measured in how much one sacrificed, but in the truth of who stood by you. He felt her presence in the room, a whisper of strength. Marcus closed the ledger with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the study like a gavel striking wood. Final. Unyielding. He rested his hands on the closed book, eyes glistening but jaw set firm. "No more," he repeated, louder this time, as though declaring it to the house, to Lydia, to the ghosts of Christmas past. In that moment something shifted inside him. The grief remained, the ache of betrayal raw, but beneath it, a steel thread of resolve began to form. They had chosen exclusion. He had chosen freedom. The tree lights flickered, and the house held his words in silence. The envelope arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. It was buried in the stack of mail Denise carried in from the porch, nestled between glossy catalogs and credit card offers. She sorted distractedly at the marble kitchen island, coffee growing cold in her hand, until her eyes froze on the stark black lettering, "Notice of foreclosure proceedings." Her breath caught. She turned it over, back again, as if the words might rearrange themselves. Her chest tightened. 4 weeks, she had been ignoring the unanswered calls from the bank, the sudden stops in the online mortgage portal that once showed paid. Jerry always told her not to worry. "Your father's got it handled. He owes us that much," he'd say. But now the truth was in her trembling hands. She barely had time to open the envelope before Jerry stormed into the kitchen. He wore his usual work-from-home uniform, pressed shirt, gold watch, no tie. His phone was clamped between his shoulder and ear, but the sharpness in his eyes locked onto her. "What's that?" Denise tried to tuck the notice under the rest of the mail. "Just bills." Jerry snatched the envelope with a swiftness that made her flinch. He tore it open, scanned the first lines, and for a moment the entire kitchen seemed to fall into silence. Then it erupted. "Foreclosure?" Jerry's voice boomed, rattling the crystal glasses in the cabinet. "What the hell is this?" Denise shrank back, coffee sloshing over her fingers. I don't know. Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe Daddy. Your father." Jerry spat the words like poison. He slammed the notice down on the counter, his fist following so hard the marble seemed to quake. He stopped the payments. Denise's lips trembled. No, he wouldn't. He did. Jerry jabbed a finger at the paper. "Look at it. He cut us off. The man thinks he can humiliate me, embarrass us like this? After everything?" Denise clutched her robe tighter around her. Her mind flashed back to Christmas night, the door, her father's eyes, the pie he clutched like an offering. His face had looked so small, so broken. She hadn't said a word. And now here it was, the price of her silence. Jerry began pacing the kitchen, his anger filling every corner. "We have a reputation, Denise. We have neighbors, friends, business partners. You think I'm going to let them find out our house is being taken from us?" His voice cracked with fury. "Your father's trying to ruin us." Denise swallowed hard. She wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that her father had carried them for years, that this house, these vacations, the private school for Tasha, all of it had been propped up by his sacrifices. But fear locked her throat. She had seen Jerry's rage before, seen the way it could spiral into doors slammed, plates shattered, words that left bruises no one else could see. "Fix it," Jerry demanded, looming over her now. "Call him. Beg if you have to. He'll listen to you." Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head faintly. I don't think he will." Jerry's face darkened, veins standing out along his temple. For the first time, Denise realized the walls of their beautiful home, the granite countertops, the grand staircase, the glittering chandelier, were nothing more than a shell. A house built on borrowed money, borrowed pride, borrowed loyalty. And it was all collapsing. She looked down at the foreclosure notice spread between them. The paper blurred through her tears. For the first time in years, Denise felt the full weight of her choices pressing down on her chest. The silence at that door, the look on her father's face, she had betrayed him. And now, the life she'd chosen with Jerry was betraying her in return. Jerry grabbed his phone again, muttering about lawyers, about appearances, about control. Denise stood frozen at the island, the notice still burning in her hands. Their perfect image had cracked, and no amount of money, or lies, could make it whole again. The winter sun hung low, casting long shadows across the street. Marcus sat on his porch, bundled in his heavy coat, the steam from his mug curling into the crisp January air. His rocking chair creaked softly with each back and forth, the rhythm grounding him. For the first time in weeks he felt no rush, no weight to carry. Just the steady beat of his own breath. He had become something of a mystery to the neighborhood. Most had known Marcus for years, quiet, dependable, the man who shoveled his walk even when the snow was still falling. But lately whispers traveled through the cul-de-sac. Whispers about Denise. About Jerry. About foreclosure notices. Today one of those whispers walked up his steps. "Morning, Marcus." It was Evelyn Carter, a widow like him 2 houses down. She clutched her coat tighter, her eyes searching his face with hesitant concern. "I hate to bother you, but folks are talking." Marcus raised his brow, taking a measured sip of coffee. "Aren't they always?" Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice. "It's about Denise. About Jerry. People say the bank's after their house. And," she hesitated, "they say you cut them off. That you left them stranded." Marcus's chair stilled. He studied her for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then slowly he set his mug down on the small table beside him. "I didn't cut them off," he said quietly. "I stopped carrying them." Evelyn's lips parted, but she said nothing. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice carried a weight, but no anger, just truth. "Do you know what it's like, Evelyn? To stand at your own daughter's door on Christmas night, pie in your hands, heart in your throat, and be told you don't belong? To see her standing there, watching and saying nothing?" His words trailed into the cold air. Evelyn's eyes softened, but she didn't interrupt. "I raised that girl," Marcus continued, his voice roughening. "Paid her tuition. Her rent. Helped buy that house they're living in now. When her car broke down, I fixed it. When their credit was bad, I co-signed. When their mortgage came calling, I paid it. Month after month, year after year." He paused, his jaw tightening. $250,000. My retirement. My future. Evelyn drew in a quiet breath. "And what did it buy me?" Marcus's gaze drifted out toward the street. "A son-in-law who looks at me like dirt. A daughter too afraid or too blind to stand beside me. So no, I didn't cut them off. I just said enough." The rocking chair creaked again as he leaned back, his eyes heavy with memory. For a long moment, the porch was silent except for the soft whistle of wind. Evelyn shifted, her voice careful. "Marcus, people will judge. They'll say a father should never turn his back." Marcus gave a small, bitter chuckle. "Let them judge. They don't know what I hold." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a folded slip of paper, an old receipt. He unfolded it slowly, the ink faded but still legible. "This is one of hundreds. Every check I wrote. Every bill I covered. I kept them all." His eyes flickered with quiet fire. "Proof. Every dollar. Every sacrifice. They want to paint me as cruel? Let them try. I've got the truth stacked high in a shoebox upstairs." Evelyn stared at the paper, then at Marcus. For the first time she saw not just a grieving widower, but a man steady in his conviction, unwilling to be erased by the very people he had built up. Marcus slipped the receipt back into his pocket, lifted his mug and took another slow sip. "You can tell them," he said evenly. "Tell the whole street if you want. I'm done hiding what happened." The steam rose again from his coffee, curling like a quiet banner of defiance. Evelyn nodded faintly, then stepped back down the porch, her face a mix of sympathy and respect. And Marcus just rocked, steady and calm as though the truth itself was enough to keep him warm. The living room lights were dim, the curtains drawn tight. Jerry paced with his phone in hand, the foreclosure notice crumpled on the coffee table like an accusation. Denise sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders hunched, wringing her hands. "Listen to me," Jerry said sharply, his voice clipped. "We need to control the story before it controls us." He thrust the phone toward her. "People already know. The neighbors, the church, everyone's talking. If we don't get ahead of this, we're finished. Denise swallowed, her throat raw from crying. What do you want me to do? Jerry leaned down, his face close, his tone softening into persuasion. You're his daughter. You're the sympathetic one. People will listen to you. They'll see you as a victim. We put out the right message, and suddenly it's not about us losing the house. It's about a bitter old man abandoning his family. Denise flinched at the word bitter, but Jerry pressed on, already framing the narrative. We play up the sacrifices you've made, the stress you've been under, how heartless it was for him to walk away right when you needed him most. Tears, Denise. People believe tears. Her hands shook. She thought of her father's porch, of his quiet voice when he said, I just said enough. But Jerry's eyes bore into hers, demanding, daring her to disobey. A half hour later, Denise sat in front of Jerry's ring light, mascara already smudging at the corners of her eyes. Jerry adjusted the camera angle, coached her posture, and mouthed the words she should use. Start when you're ready, he said, hitting record. Denise took a shaky breath. Hi everyone, she began, her voice trembling. This is hard for me to talk about, but I feel like people need to know the truth. Tears welled as she looked into the lens, her shame mingling with the script Jerry had drilled into her. My father, Marcus Fred, turned his back on us. He walked away from his only daughter and his granddaughter. He stopped helping us with our home even though he knew we'd lose everything. I don't know why he's become so bitter, so angry, but we are hurting. She broke then, real tears spilling down her face. Her hands covered her mouth. Jerry gave her a discreet thumbs up behind the camera. When the clip went live, it spread like wildfire. Friends from church shared it with captions like pray for Denise and her family. A cousin in Atlanta posted it with, I can't believe Uncle Marcus did this. Within hours, the video had hundreds of comments. Sympathy for Denise, outrage at Marcus, and a scattering of voices calling the whole thing suspicious. At the grocery store that week, Marcus felt the shift. Conversations hushed when he walked down the aisle. A woman he'd known for years avoided his gaze. At church, the pastor's sermon about honor thy father and mother was punctuated by uneasy glances. Some whispered that Marcus had grown cold and selfish in his old age. Others muttered that Jerry always seemed too slick, too rehearsed, and that Marcus's silence was the mark of a man with nothing to hide. Marcus heard it all but said nothing. He walked out of church with his head held high, though his chest ached with every sideways glance. At the porch one evening, Evelyn stopped by again, her expression apologetic. I saw the video, she said gently. People are talking. Marcus sipped his coffee, the rocking chair steady beneath him. Let them, he murmured. Then after a pause he added, the truth doesn't need a camera. It just needs time. Inside, Denise sat in her kitchen, scrolling through the comments on her video. Each heart emoji, each stay strong brought her no comfort, only a deeper hollow inside her. She saw one lone comment from a man she didn't recognize. If he raised you, if he paid for you, maybe you should have stood by him. Denise clicked away quickly, her hands trembling. Jerry, standing behind her, didn't notice. He was already planning the next post. The attic smelled of dust and cedar, the kind of air that clung to old boxes and older memories. Marcus climbed the narrow steps slowly, his knees stiff but his resolve strong. A single bare bulb lit the low-ceilinged space, casting long shadows over trunks, photo albums, and Christmas decorations Lydia once loved. He moved past them all, toward the far corner where a battered shoebox sat beneath a faded quilt. He crouched, hands steady as he pulled the box free. Its cardboard edges were worn, its lid bowed from years of weight, but it had held its secrets faithfully. Marcus sat cross-legged on the attic floor, the box in front of him. He lifted the lid. Inside lay the history of his sacrifices. Stacks of receipts, neatly folded, their ink faded but legible. Bank slips showing transfers to Denise and Jerry's account. Tuition checks. Mortgage payments marked paid by Marcus Fred. He smoothed them out one by one, each paper a reminder of a promise he had kept, even when it cost him dearly. Near the bottom were the text messages, printed from an old phone. Denise's words were there in black and white. Daddy, I'll pay you back as soon as we're stable. Another, you're saving us. I don't know what we'd do without you. Yet there had been no repayments, no acknowledgments, only more requests, more silence. Marcus laid everything across the attic floor in neat rows, as though building his own courtroom. He stared at them until his eyes stung, the evidence of his love now transformed into a paper trail of betrayal. For the first time since Christmas night, anger gave way to clarity. This wasn't just personal. This was a story, one his community deserved to hear, one his daughter and son-in-law had twisted into lies. He gathered the documents into a binder Lydia had once used for recipes. Its leather cover was cracked, but it held the truth more securely than any digital screen could. The next morning, Marcus walked into the office of the Riverbend Chronicle, the local paper that had reported every wedding, funeral, and city scandal for 50 years. The receptionist, surprised by the elderly man with the thick binder, led him to a corner office where a young reporter named Caleb Lawson typed furiously at his desk. Caleb looked up, glasses sliding down his nose. "Mr. Fred, isn't it? What brings you in?" Marcus set the binder on the desk with a decisive thud. "You want a story? Here's one." Caleb opened it cautiously, flipping through the receipts, the slips, the messages. His eyes widened as he moved from page to page. This is detailed. You've kept everything." "I knew one day I might need to," Marcus said quietly. "And now I do. My daughter and her husband went on camera and painted me as some bitter old man who abandoned them. But that's not the truth. This is the truth." Caleb leaned back, rubbing his chin. "If what you're showing me checks out, this isn't just family drama. This is financial exploitation. A man drained of his savings, pushed aside, then vilified when he said enough? That's bigger than your porch, Mr. Fred. That's a scandal." Marcus folded his hands, his eyes steady. "I don't want pity. I want the record set straight." Caleb closed the binder, the weight of it settling like a verdict. "Then let's set it straight." As Marcus left the newsroom, a strange calm settled over him. He had carried his sacrifices in silence for too long. Now the shoebox had spoken, and the world was about to listen. The article hit the newsstands on a Sunday morning. By noon it was everywhere, shared on Facebook, reposted by community blogs, even discussed in hushed voices outside the sanctuary after church. Widower's sacrifice turned sour. Local man claims $250,000 loss to daughter's family. The headline alone was enough to split the town. Some read it with sympathy, shaking their heads at Jerry and Denise's ingratitude. Others muttered that Marcus should have kept private business private. But for Jerry, the headline was gasoline poured on an open flame. By Monday, his rage had been weaponized into action. A thick envelope arrived at Marcus's door, hand-delivered by a courier. The seal bore the name of one of the city's most aggressive law firms. Inside was a letter heavy with legal jargon but simple in meaning. Cease and desist. Marcus was accused of harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The letter demanded he retract his statements, issue a public apology, and stop stalking and slandering his daughter's family, or face a lawsuit. Marcus read it at his kitchen table, his coffee cooling beside him. The words blurred for a moment, not from fear but from disbelief. Harassment? Slander? He had lived his entire life with honor, with records to prove his every claim. Now Jerry's lawyers were twisting the truth into a weapon. That evening, Evelyn stopped by and found him staring at the letter. "They're trying to scare you," she said firmly after skimming the pages. "You showed proof, Marcus. They've got nothing but noise." Marcus exhaled slowly. Noise can ruin a man just as quick as truth can save him. Across town, Jerry was reveling in the theater of control. He stood in his office, pacing as his lawyer confirmed the letter had been served. "Good," Jerry muttered. "That old man wants to play games, let him choke on legal fees." He pictured Marcus hunched in his little house, sweating over the threat. The thought made him smile. Denise, sitting quietly in the corner, didn't smile. She hadn't since the article dropped. Every time she read her father's words, "I carried them until I couldn't anymore," the truth pulled at her like a tide. But she also saw Jerry's fury, the way his hands curled into fists, the sharpness in his voice when he said her father's name. She thought of the shoebox, of the receipts she knew existed. She had seen them years ago. She had texted those promises herself. And yet here she was, silent, letting Jerry mount his attack. "Jerry," she whispered, "what if this goes too far? What if people start digging?" He turned on her, eyes hard. "Then you stay quiet. Do you hear me? You stand by me. If he wins, we lose everything. You like this house? This lifestyle? Then you'd better decide which side you're on." Denise's breath hitched. She nodded faintly, though her heart cracked with the weight of it. Her father's silence was strength. Her own was cowardice. Back at his home, Marcus placed the legal letter into the same binder as the receipts. Another piece of the puzzle, another entry in the record of his battle. He didn't crumble, didn't rage. He simply whispered into the quiet room, "If this is the fight, then let it come." The stage was set, father against son-in-law, truth against fabrication. And Denise stood in the middle, torn apart by a loyalty that was no longer love, and a truth she could no longer deny. The house that once felt like a trophy had begun to shrink around them. The marble counters and polished hardwood floors couldn't muffle the sound of raised voices anymore. Jerry and Denise's arguments erupted like summer storms, loud, sudden, and violent in tone. It began with the foreclosure notice taped to the front door, a scarlet letter for the whole neighborhood to see. Denise ripped it down quickly, hoping the neighbors hadn't noticed. But Tasha had. Now, behind closed doors, the truth clawed its way out. "You told me you had it under control." Denise snapped, her voice sharp, trembling. "You said Daddy would never pull the plug. And now there's a foreclosure notice on our house." Jerry loomed across the living room, his face red with rage. "Do you think I could have predicted he'd run to the papers like a bitter old fool? He's trying to humiliate us, Denise. And you're just going to stand there and blame me?" Denise's hands shook as she folded the paper tighter in her grip. "He's not lying, Jerry. You know he isn't. Every tuition check, every mortgage payment, it was him. And you stood there on Christmas and told him he wasn't welcome. And her voice cracked. I let you." Jerry's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous growl. "Don't you dare turn on me. You think you'd have this house without me? Without what I provide?" Her laugh was bitter. "What you provide? You've lived off my father's generosity since the day we got married. I watched him work himself down to nothing, and for what? So you could sit in your leather chair and bark orders like a king?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Jerry's jaw tightened. For a moment, Denise thought he might actually strike her. But instead he turned away, fists clenching at his sides. "You're ungrateful. That's what you are. Ungrateful and weak. You think anyone will care about him once I'm done? I've got lawyers. I've got people." He's nothing but a bitter old man with a shoebox of papers. Neither of them noticed the small figure at the top of the stairs. Tasha, 14 and sharp-eyed, had crept out of her room when the voices rose. She crouched, listening, her heart thudding against her ribs. She had heard whispers at school, other kids mentioning her grandfather's name after the article came out. She had asked her mother once if it was true, if Grandpa Marcus really paid for everything. Denise had brushed her off. But now, in the rawness of her parents' fight, the truth spilled. Every word cracked the story she had been fed. Her grandfather wasn't the selfish villain Jerry painted. He was the reason they had this life at all. Tasha pressed her hand to her mouth, her young mind spinning. She thought of Christmas, how her grandfather had arrived with that pie, standing in the snow looking so hopeful. She remembered how her father's voice had been like steel when he told him to leave. She remembered the way her mother hadn't spoken. The silence suddenly made sense. Downstairs, Denise finally sank into the couch, tears streaking her face. "I can't keep living like this, Jerry. I can't keep lying to everyone, especially Tasha. She deserves to know the truth about her grandfather." Jerry spun, his voice a snarl. "You'll say nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing. She starts asking questions, you shut it down. You tell her what I tell you to tell her." Tasha slipped back into her room, closing the door softly behind her. But the questions had already taken root. Her grandfather wasn't the villain. Her father wasn't the hero. And her mother was breaking. For the first time, Tasha began to see the cracks in the story, and in the marriage that held their family together. The newspaper hit doorsteps just after dawn. The headline stretched across the front page in bold, black letters. "Elder betrayed by family, $250,000 gone, silence at Christmas." By breakfast, the story was already everywhere. In barber shops, women's prayer circles, and neighborhood diners, the name Marcus Fred rolled off tongues like a spark catching dry brush. Some spoke with pity, some with disgust, others with indignation. The community had always known Marcus. He was the quiet, dignified man who still tipped his hat at elders in church, who brought his late wife flowers long after she passed, who always had a word of encouragement for younger men. To many, the idea of him lying was unthinkable. But there was also Denise, the pretty girl they'd watched grow up, now living in a grand house, married to a man who looked like success. Jerry knew how to work a room, shaking hands, telling jokes, projecting confidence. To some, Marcus's claims felt like jealousy, the bitterness of a lonely widower watching his daughter thrive without him. The split was instant and it was ugly. At Gloria's Cafe, a table of retirees poured over the article. "That man gave his whole life for his daughter," one muttered, tapping the print with his finger. "And she let that husband of hers treat him like trash? Unforgivable." 2 booths over, a younger couple shook their heads. "We don't know the full story," the husband said cautiously. Sometimes old folks exaggerate. Maybe he gave them money but not that much. Why would a father go to the press if he wasn't bitter? By noon the article had reached the church. Pastor Langford, a man careful with words, knew the scandal could divide his congregation. He prayed for wisdom, but whispers already filled the pews. Sister Beverly shook her head in dismay. That Denise sat right in this church beside her daddy every Sunday. Now look. Others clucked their tongues at Marcus instead. He should have handled family matters in private. Airing dirty laundry helps no one. At Marcus's house the phone rang non-stop. Some calls were from old friends offering support, their voices warm, steady. Others were sharper, accusing him of tearing his family apart for attention. Marcus listened quietly, thanked the callers, and hung up. His resolve did not waver, though each ring reminded him how public his private wounds had become. Meanwhile, Jerry was in full damage control. He stormed into his lawyer's office, waving the paper like a weapon. They made him look like some saint and me like a crook. We need to sue. We need to hit back harder. The lawyer leaned back, steepling his fingers. Be careful, Jerry. If we take this to court, Marcus's receipts and records will come under scrutiny. And if they're solid, he let the sentence hang. Jerry's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being told no. Denise sat silently beside him, clutching her purse. Her face was pale, her eyes red. She could barely meet the lawyer's gaze. Because deep inside she knew the truth. Marcus had the proof. Every receipt. Every check. Every desperate text she had sent. She thought of her father that morning, how he must have opened the paper, hands trembling, seeing his private pain broadcast to thousands. She pictured him sitting alone at his kitchen table, reading words that were both vindication and humiliation. For a moment she wanted to go to him. To tell him she was sorry. But Jerry's hand clamped down on hers, hard and possessive. We'll fight this, he said through gritted teeth. We'll bury him. Tasha, however, read the story in a different light. She found the paper folded on the kitchen counter, left there after Jerry's tirade. She sat on the stairs and read every word slowly, her heart pounding harder with each line. The article painted Marcus not as a bitter old man, but as a father who had sacrificed quietly until humiliation broke him. It quoted neighbors who recalled seeing him work long hours, or who remembered him paying Denise's tuition when she was at Spelman. It mentioned the shoebox of receipts, described by the reporter as a testament to years of unrecognized devotion. By the time Tasha finished, her throat was tight. She remembered the way her grandfather had looked that snowy Christmas night, pie in hand, turned away like a stranger. She remembered how her father had gloated, how her mother had wept in silence. Now with the story in black and white, the pieces fit. Her grandfather wasn't bitter, he was betrayed. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it under her pillow. That night, lying awake, she whispered to herself, I need to see him. I need to know the truth. The article spread further than anyone expected. A local radio station picked it up, sparking a heated debate on air. Callers flooded the lines, some defending Marcus, others siding with Jerry and Denise. Talk shows in nearby cities invited the reporter to speak about the betrayal story. What began as a neighborhood scandal was fast becoming a regional conversation. By the end of the week, Marcus Fred was no longer just a widower with a family problem. He was a symbol of parental sacrifice, of betrayal, of the quiet dignity too often ignored until it's broken. And in the house on Crestwood Drive, Jerry and Denise realized the spotless reputation they had worked so hard to maintain was gone. Their name was no longer whispered with admiration but dissected with suspicion. The war was no longer behind closed doors. It was public. And there was no turning back. The house was quiet that night, too quiet for a family that used to echo with laughter, the hum of music, and Jerry's booming voice holding court. But now the silence was thick, tense, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to shatter. Tasha sat at the kitchen table, the newspaper spread out before her. She had read it 3 times already, her eyes dragging again and again over the headline, over the quotes from neighbors and church members, over the description of her grandfather's shoebox of proof. Her chest tightened with every word. The memory of Christmas clawed its way back. The snow falling outside, the warmth of the fireplace, the smell of turkey in the oven. And then the knock at the door. Her grandfather's smile, hopeful but timid, the foil-wrapped pie in his hands. And her father's voice. Cold. Sure. Final. You're not welcome here. Her mother had stood there too. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't moved. She had just let it happen. The silence in that moment, Tasha realized now, had been its own betrayal. Denise walked into the kitchen, her face weary, her eyes carrying the weight of sleepless nights. She stopped short when she saw her daughter staring at the paper. "Tasha, it's late. You should be in bed." But Tasha didn't move. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she pushed the paper toward her mother. "Why didn't you say anything?" Denise blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "You let him stand out there," Tasha said, her voice rising. "You let Grandpa stand in the cold while we sat inside eating. You watched Dad slam the door in his face and you didn't say one word. Not one." Denise's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her throat tightened, her heart racing as though every word her daughter spoke was peeling back a layer of armor she had worn for years. "Is it true?" Tasha pressed, her eyes burning. "Did he really pay for everything? The house, your school, everything we have? Was it all him?" Denise sank into the chair opposite her daughter, her legs unable to hold her any longer. For years she had told herself the silence was protection, that by saying nothing she was keeping the peace, sparing Tasha from ugly truths, keeping Jerry's temper from boiling over. But now, staring into her daughter's eyes, she saw what that silence had become. It wasn't a shield. It was a chain. "Yes," Denise whispered, her voice cracking. "It's true. Every check, every payment, it was your grandfather. He carried us. And I let him." Tasha's jaw clenched. "Why?" Tears welled in Denise's eyes, spilling before she could stop them. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of losing what we had. Afraid of Jerry's anger. Afraid of the truth." She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking. "And because deep down, part of me believed we deserved it. That after all Daddy had worked for, it was only right he give it to us. But I was wrong. God help me, I was so wrong." The rawness in her mother's voice silenced Tasha for a moment, but not her anger. She slammed her fist lightly against the table, startling them both. "You watched him, Mom. He's your father. And you let Dad treat him like nothing. Do you know what people at school are saying? Do you know how it feels to hear my friends whisper that my grandfather is the one keeping a roof over my head?" Denise reached across the table, but Tasha pulled her hands back. "I didn't want you to know," Denise pleaded. "I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" Tasha shot back. "You weren't protecting me. You were protecting him." Her voice shook with the fury of a child finally seeing the cracks in her parents. "You were protecting Jerry while Grandpa stood outside humiliated. Do you know what that does to me? To know the man who bought me Christmas gifts, who paid for this house, was left outside like a stranger." Denise's sobs filled the room. "I know," she whispered. "Every night since I've seen his face. The disappointment. The hurt. I hear his voice in my head and it breaks me. I thought silence would keep the peace, but all it did was destroy everything." The two sat in silence, the weight of truth pressing down on them. Finally, Tasha spoke again, her voice low but unyielding. "I'm going to see him." Denise's head shot up, her eyes wide. "No, Tasha, you can't. Jerry." "I don't care about Jerry," Tasha said, her tone steel. "I want to see my grandfather. I want to hear from him, not from Dad, not from the paper. From him." Denise opened her mouth to argue, but the words died on her tongue. She saw in her daughter's eyes the same stubborn fire Marcus carried, the same refusal to bow to injustice. And in that moment, Denise realized the truth. The silence she had chosen all these years had not just chained her. It had shackled her daughter too. Now the chain was breaking. Denise covered her face with her hands and sobbed, the sound echoing through the house that no longer felt like a home. Upstairs, Jerry stirred in his sleep, unaware of the rebellion brewing under his roof. But Tasha knew. She had chosen. And there was no turning back. Marcus never trusted the silence of his own thoughts anymore. Too many nights had been spent replaying the insults, the slammed door, the weight of Denise's silence. But one cold January evening, sitting alone at his desk, he found something that shifted the story entirely. It started with an old email, buried in his files, where Jerry had once thanked him for investing in what he called a guaranteed property fund. At the time, Marcus hadn't questioned it. He had written the check with the same blind faith he always gave his daughter's family. But now, with his shoebox of receipts and records spread out like puzzle pieces, the words leapt off the page. Guaranteed property fund. Marcus frowned. He had never received a statement, never seen a return. Curious, he dug deeper. One folder led to another until he uncovered a trail. Payments labeled mortgage assistance, rerouted into a business account under the name Frederickson Holdings, LLC. The name sounded legitimate, but Marcus knew better. It was Jerry's doing. The shell. His heart pounded. This wasn't just ungratefulness anymore. was fraud. The next morning, Marcus met with Lena Carter, the young reporter who had broken the original story. She listened as he laid the evidence on her desk, printouts of transactions, checks with Jerry's name scribbled in the memo lines, and copies of company records Marcus had pulled from the state's public filings. Lena's eyes widened. Fredrickson Holdings, that's registered to a P.O. box downtown. No employees listed, no property owned. But the accounts? They're flush. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but firm. That's where my money went. He funneled it through a fake company. Called it an investment, but it was just a bank account for his lifestyle. Lena tapped her pen against her notepad, her instincts buzzing. If this checks out, Mr. Fred, we're not just talking family betrayal. We're talking financial fraud. Potentially criminal. Within days, Lena was deep into the records. She traced Jerry's investments to luxury rentals in Miami and Las Vegas, vacations billed as business retreats, and high-end cars leased through the shell company. She found payments to designers, jewelers, even a private club that cost more per month than most people's mortgages. Every discovery stripped another layer from Jerry's polished image. By the time Lena's second article went to print, the tone had shifted. The headline read, "Shell Company Tied to Family Scandal. Where did the money go?" This time there was no ambiguity. The story detailed Jerry's company, the missing funds, and Marcus's documentation of every check written in trust. It laid bare the lavish lifestyle Jerry had projected as self-made success but had, in truth, been built on deception. The fallout was immediate. At the community center, whispers spread like wildfire. Did you see the paper? That Jerry's no businessman. He's a crook, stealing from his own father-in-law. The men who once shook Jerry's hand now avoided his gaze. Women who had envied Denise's jewelry clucked their tongues, calling it blood money. At church, Pastor Langford made a carefully worded announcement. This is a time to reflect on honesty, stewardship, and the dangers of pride. Everyone knew who he met. Denise kept her head bowed so low she could barely breathe. Jerry, however, raged. He slammed the paper onto the counter, shouting, "Lies? All of it lies." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew the truth was unraveling. His phone, once buzzing with invitations and opportunities, had gone silent. Business contacts pulled away. His golf buddies stopped returning calls. The image he had polished for years was cracking, and through the cracks the fraud gleamed ugly and undeniable. At home, Denise sat trembling on the edge of their bed. "Jerry, it's over. They know. Everyone knows." But Jerry wouldn't accept it. His face twisted, his pride refusing to yield. "No. They think they know, but I'll spin it. I'll tell them your father's senile, bitter, out for revenge. He's got nothing." Denise shook her head, tears spilling. "He has everything. He kept the proof. I've seen it." Her voice broke. And now the world has seen it too. In her room, Tasha scrolled through her phone, watching classmates share the article, tagging her name with it. The shame burned hot, but beneath it was a flicker of relief. Finally, the truth was spilling into the light. Finally, her grandfather wasn't alone in his fight. And Marcus, quiet, steady Marcus, sat on his porch that evening as neighbors walked by. Some nodded with respect, others with sympathy. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt since before his wife died: vindication. Not joy, not triumph, but the weight of truth landing where it belonged. The whispers would spread beyond the community, Lena promised. With fraud involved, authorities might take interest. Jerry's downfall was no longer a matter of family loyalty or community gossip. It was a matter of law. And as the sun dipped low behind his house, Marcus whispered to himself, "No man builds a life on lies and expects it to stand." The stage was set. Jerry wasn't just the son-in-law who barred him from Christmas dinner anymore. He was the fraud who had stolen, deceived, and betrayed. And his polished image was crumbling faster than he could rebuild it. The fellowship hall was packed that Sunday evening. Word had spread through the congregation and beyond. Marcus Fred was coming forward with proof. Not rumors, not whispers, not speculation, but receipts, documents, and his voice. The people came hungry for truth, some ready to defend him, others eager to see him fall. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of neighbors, church members, even a few reporters with notebooks poised. The murmur of voices filled the air, a low thunder of anticipation. Marcus stood near the podium, a binder pressed tightly to his chest. His hands shook, not from fear but from the gravity of what he was about to do. Beside him, Evelyn rested a steadying hand on his arm. "Take your time, Marcus. Let the truth speak for itself." Across the room, Jerry sat stiff in his chair, jaw clenched, suit pressed to perfection. He looked around with a glare that dared anyone to doubt him. Beside him, Denise sat small and pale, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles blanched white. And Tasha, caught between them, sat 2 rows back with her best friend, refusing to sit by Jerry. Pastor Langford opened the meeting with a prayer, his voice deliberate, heavy with the knowledge that tonight would leave scars. Lord, let the truth be spoken and let hearts be guided by grace. Amen. Marcus stepped forward. The room quieted. His voice, when it came, was steady, carrying years of disappointment and pain. Some of you know me well. Some of you only know the story that's been whispered, twisted, and shouted in the streets these past weeks. Tonight, I've come not to argue, not to defend myself, but to show you the truth. He opened the binder. The soft click of the rings echoed like a drumbeat. Slowly, carefully, he pulled out the first page, a copy of a tuition check for Spelman College, made out to his daughter Denise. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Every check, every receipt, every promise, they're all here, Marcus continued. I worked 40 years with my hands, saved every penny I could. When my daughter and her husband came to me, I gave what I had, believing I was helping build their future. He laid out more pages. Mortgage stubs, wire transfers, text messages from Denise. One projected onto the screen at the front read, "Daddy, please, we're behind again. Jerry says it's temporary. I promise we'll pay you back." The murmurs grew louder, sharper. Neighbors shifted in their seats. Denise's face crumpled as tears slipped down her cheeks. And then Marcus played a recording, his phone hooked to the microphone. Jerry's voice filled the hall, dripping with arrogance. "Don't worry about the old man. He'll keep paying. He always does." The hall erupted. Gasps, shouts, cries of disbelief. The polished veneer Jerry had worn for years cracked wide open under the weight of his own words. Jerry leapt to his feet, face flushed crimson. "That's out of context," he shouted, his voice booming. "You people don't understand. He wanted to give us this money. He begged to be part of our lives." But his words fell flat. The evidence spoke louder. Marcus closed the binder gently. "I was never bitter," he said softly. "I was a father. A husband who wanted his wife's memory honored. A man who thought love meant sacrifice. But on Christmas, when I stood outside that door with a pie in my hand, the same pie my wife used to bake, and I was told I wasn't welcome, that's when I realized love without respect is nothing but chains." The hall went silent. Every eye turned to Denise. Her shoulders shook as she stood slowly, facing the congregation with tears streaming freely now. "He's telling the truth," she whispered. Her voice cracked but carried enough for the room to hear. "Everything my father said is true. And I was silent. I let it happen. I let Jerry," she faltered, her body trembling under the weight of confession. "I betrayed my own father." Jerry spun on her, his voice a hiss. "Sit down, Denise. Don't you dare." But she didn't. She turned away from him, clutching her daughter's hand instead. Tasha rose beside her mother, chin lifted with defiance. "I believe Grandpa," she said loudly, her voice clear, cutting through the tension like glass. The congregation erupted again, some with outrage at Jerry, others with murmurs of support for Marcus. Pastor Langford raised his hands, calling for calm, but the truth had already detonated. Jerry tried one last time to recover, his voice hoarse. "You're all fools. You think this makes him a saint? He's just a bitter old man trying to drag me down." But no one was listening anymore. Marcus stepped back from the podium, weary but unbowed. For the first time in years he didn't feel like a man on trial. He felt like a man who had laid down his burden in the open. And as the congregation stared at the wreckage of Jerry's lies, one thing became undeniable: the truth was out. The family's fracture was no longer private. It was public, raw, and irreversible. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt like a tomb. Marcus Fred sat at his kitchen table, the same table that had carried so many years of family dinners, laughter, and sorrow. The glow of the evening sun filtered through the curtains, painting the room gold. In front of him sat 2 chairs. One held his coat, draped neatly as though someone were coming home. The other, the one directly across from him, remained empty. For years that empty chair had mocked him. It had been a reminder of absence. His wife gone, his daughter distant, his sacrifices invisible. Every meal eaten alone had been a silent echo of betrayal. But tonight it was different. The showdown at the fellowship hall had shifted everything. The truth was no longer buried in receipts and whispered conversations. It was out, undeniable. Jerry's lies had been exposed, his arrogance shattered. And Denise, his little girl broken by guilt, had finally spoken. Marcus leaned back, hands resting on the table's edge. He could still hear her voice trembling through tears. "I betrayed my own father." And Tasha's voice, steady and clear, standing up for him in front of the whole community. That had pierced his heart in a way no ledger or receipt ever could. Forgiveness. The word floated in the stillness. Did he have it in him? Could he lay down decades of wounds and let Denise back in, despite the silence that had cut deeper than Jerry's insults? He didn't know. Not yet. But what he did know was this: the choice was finally his. Not Jerry's, not Denise's, not the community's. Marcus rose slowly, the stiffness of age in his bones. He walked to the mantel where his wife's photograph stood. Her gentle smile watched him, the same smile she'd worn every Christmas as she placed ornaments on the tree. He touched the frame softly. "I did what I had to, Martha," he whispered. "I carried them as long as I could. But tonight I laid it down." Turning back, he pulled out the empty chair and sat opposite it. He didn't cry this time. He didn't ache. Instead, he allowed himself to breathe, deeply, fully, like a man who had been holding his breath for years. Maybe Denise would come tomorrow. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe Jerry's legal ruin would be the justice everyone wanted, or maybe he would slip away into another scheme. Marcus no longer needed to chase it. Because tonight, the empty chair was no longer a wound. It was a space. A possibility. A reminder that he was not bound by rejection or humiliation anymore. It was his table. His home. His life. His choice. The clock ticked softly in the background. Marcus reached for the pecan pie tin, the same one he'd carried to Denise's doorstep months ago. The pie was long gone, but he smiled anyway. He cut himself a small slice of something he had baked earlier, placed it on his plate, and raised his fork like a quiet toast to himself. "To dignity," he murmured. "To freedom." And he ate, not as a man abandoned, but as a man restored. The final image lingered. Marcus at his table, the chair across from him waiting, not as a hollow reminder of loneliness, but as a symbol of choice. His choice. His story. What would you have done if you were Marcus? Would you forgive Denise, or walk away for good? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This story isn't complete without your voice. Don't forget to like this video if Marcus's journey touched your heart. And subscribe now, because stories like this deserve to be told and you don't want to miss the next one.